There is a particular kind of quiet that arrives when you catch your own reflection a moment too late, and it does not move with you. A hesitation, a breath that belongs to someone else. Tonight, settle into that hesitation. Let the lights lower. Let the mirrors go dark. Whatever is wearing your face in the corners of these stories, it cannot follow you into sleep. Not yet. Not tonight. Rest now. The knock came at 11 past 11, 3 slow raps that felt less like a request and more like a statement. He opened the door and looked at himself, not a reflection. There was no glass between them, no trick of the coastal fog that had been rolling in all evening off the water. The man on the porch had his face, his exact face, down to the small scar above the left eyebrow from a bicycle fall when he was 9 years old. Same height, same hands, hanging loose at the sides. The only difference was the jacket, a grey wool coat he had never owned, slightly damp at the shoulders from the fog. The other man looked at him the way you look at someone whose name you already know, but have decided not to say. 4 seconds. He counted them without meaning to, the way you count the gap between lightning and thunder to know how close the danger is. Then the figure turned. No urgency, no hesitation, just a clean and unhurried pivot on the heel, and he walked down the porch steps and into the street. He did not look back. The fog received him the way fog receives everything, without ceremony, without a sound. And then there was only the empty road and the diffused orange smear of a street lamp somewhere beyond the grey. He stood in the open doorway for a long time. The cold air moved past him into the house. He closed the door. He turned the deadbolt. He did not call anyone. He was not sure what he would say. He told himself it was nothing, and he almost believed it by the time he reached the waterfront. The fog had pulled back overnight, leaving the kind of pale winter light that makes everything look recently washed. The planks of the boardwalk darker at the edges where the moisture still clung, the water flat and colourless as old pewter. The coffee shop smelled the way it always did, of burnt milk and cardamom, and something faintly sweet he had never been able to identify. He was already reaching for his wallet when she looked up and smiled. Not the polite smile she gave strangers, but the loose and easy one reserved for someone expected. She said she was glad he came back. She said he had left this last time. She held out his debit card between 2 fingers and he took it, because that was the only thing to do, the only action available to a person standing in a familiar room while the floor slowly tilted beneath them. He turned the card over, his name, the last 4 digits he had memorized the way you memorize your own birth date, without trying, without meaning to. He said thank you. She said of course, and turned to the espresso machine as though nothing had occurred. He drank his coffee at the window and watched the street. On Commercial, the hardware store owner raised a hand from behind the glass, deliberate and warm, the wave of a man saluting someone he has known for years. The narrator kept walking. He did not wave back. He had never opened that door in his life. He started writing things down. A spiral notebook, the cheap kind with a cardboard cover because he needed to see it laid out in front of him. Needed the act of pressing pen to paper to make it feel real rather than accumulated and drifting. The list grew faster than he expected. Corinne from the permitting office stopped him in the hallway on Tuesday and said she hoped he was feeling better, that he had looked a little out of it at lunch the previous Friday, sitting alone at the picnic table by the river instead of coming inside with everyone else. He had been homesick last Friday. He had not left his apartment. He had eaten saltines and watched the ceiling and listened to the radiator knock. He wrote it down. He called his landlord that afternoon about a package. The landlord mentioned, easy and offhand, that he had spotted him out by the fuse box Saturday around dusk. Said it was no problem at all, just checking in, just being neighbourly. He thanked him and set the phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a moment. He crossed the yard slowly, the dead grass crunching under his shoes, and stopped several feet short of the grey metal box mounted to the foundation. He stood there long enough that his fingers went cold. Then he stepped forward and lifted the cover. It swung out smoothly on its hinge. Someone had gone through the breakers one by one. He could tell by the way each switch sat at a slightly different angle, tested and returned. Careful and deliberate as a study. He told Marcus over the phone because he could not make himself say it in person, could not sit across a table and watch someone he trusted decide whether or not to believe him. Marcus was quiet for a long time after he finished. Not the quiet of someone thinking through a response, but the quiet of someone deciding how much to say. Then Marcus told him. About 10 days ago, a little after 9 at night, he had seen him at the gas station on Duane Street, standing near the air pump, hands in his pockets, like he had been waiting there for a while. They talked for a few minutes. He was relaxed, Marcus said. Easy. He asked after his sister Renee by name, asked whether she was still up in Portland, said something about how the two of them should all get dinner sometime. He pressed the phone against his ear and said nothing. He does not have a sister named Renee. He does not have a sister at all. Marcus kept going, quieter now, like he was only just understanding what he was describing. At the end of the conversation, the man at the gas station had said he might need Marcus to cover for him at some point soon. Nothing serious, just a scheduling thing, he would explain later. Marcus had said sure, of course, and they had said goodnight and gone their separate ways. He sat down on the kitchen floor without meaning to. He said the name out loud just once. Renee. It meant nothing to him. It landed like a word in a foreign language, shapeless and unattached to anything alive. He started taking photographs of himself every morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror with the light on, same angle, same expression, checking that the face looking back at him was still continuous with the one from the day before. It felt absurd. It also felt necessary. He changed his coffee shop first, then his route to work, then the dry cleaner, the pharmacy, the small park where he sometimes ate lunch. He varied his timing, left earlier or later, paid in cash, gave no name when asked. He told himself he was being careful. He told himself that careful was enough. On the 4th day, he pushed open the door of the new place, a quiet shop on Henley Street that he had never been to before in his life, and stopped. His umbrella was leaning against the wall just inside the entrance, the black one with the worn loop on the handle where the fabric had started to fray at the seam. He had left it at home that morning, propped in the corner by the coat rack. He was certain of this the way you are certain of small, unremarkable things you have done 1,000 times. He did not touch it. He stood in the doorway while someone behind him made a polite sound, waiting to get past, and he stared at the umbrella and understood something that no amount of photographs was going to fix. It was not following him. It was simply already there, waiting, doing the patient and ordinary work of becoming him one quiet morning at a time. He called in sick on a Thursday and borrowed Daniel's car without explaining why, just said he needed it for the day, something personal, and Daniel had nodded and handed over the keys without pushing. He drove up the hill before 7 and found a spot with a clean sightline to the building entrance, and sat there with the engine off and a coffee going cold in the cup holder and waited. 6 hours of nothing. Pigeons. A woman with a stroller. The super dragging recycling bins out to the curb. Normal life conducting its normal business in front of a normal building, and Marcus sat watching it all with his hands in his lap, feeling quietly ridiculous. At 4 o'clock the figure came around the corner. He recognized the pace first. That particular rhythm, just slightly unhurried, the weight settling forward on each step. Then the hands pushed into the coat pockets the way he pushed his own when the cold was getting into his knuckles. The slight lean into the wind that he had never once thought about as a habit until this moment. Watching it reproduced on someone else at a distance of 200 feet. It did not look up. It went through the front door with a key. He watched the window of his apartment. The kitchen light came on. A shape moved inside with the ease of someone who knew where everything was, who had opened that refrigerator 100 times, who had stood at that counter and simply belonged there. He sat in the car for 40 minutes. Then he went upstairs. Everything was where he had left it. The rooms held their usual silence, the particular quality of air that a space keeps when it has been empty. Nothing moved. Nothing was gone. The drying rack held 2 mugs. He had washed one that morning. He was certain of it. He went to the police on Friday morning. The officer who took his report had the practiced patience of someone who had sat across from frightened people for a long time and learned to hold his expression very still. He listened. He asked questions in a tone that was genuinely kind and genuinely disbelieving in equal measure. The two things braided together so smoothly that Marcus could not find the seam between them. Had he been under any unusual stress lately? Had his sleep been regular? Was there anyone in his life he trusted who he might speak to? The officer typed everything he said into a form and printed a copy and slid it across the desk in a clear plastic sleeve. And Marcus understood, walking back out into the afternoon, that the paper meant nothing except that the conversation had been recorded somewhere and could be forgotten cleanly. He took the long way home without meaning to. He was nearly past the post office when the photograph caught him. It was tacked to the community board between a lost cat notice and a flyer for a yoga class. A newsletter page from the waterfront cleanup 3 weeks ago. He was in it. He could see himself near the centre, holding a garbage bag, squinting into the pale October light. He stood there looking at his own face for a long moment before his eyes moved left, the way you eventually check the edges of any photograph, the background, the people you did not notice when you were busy being present. It was standing 2 people away from him, same face, same coat, captured in the same grey morning light, 3 weeks before he had ever thought to look. He sat in the dark for a long time without taking his coat off. The scheduling thing kept surfacing. Cover for me. It would not be a big deal. He had said yes without thinking because that was the kind of person he was. The kind of person who said yes, who remembered faces, who could be called upon to confirm that something had happened or had not. He understood now what that made him. He understood now what he had been selected for. He thought about the fuse box, the way it had been standing there in the dark of his basement with its hand already raised, as though it had been waiting to be caught and had prepared a reason. He thought about the key, the copy he had never made, the lock he had never changed. He thought about weeks of ordinary mornings, a man seen at a window, a voice heard through a wall, a name written in a calendar, a face remembered in a crowd. He thought about how much of an alibi is simply the shape a person leaves behind in other people's minds. He picked up his phone to call Marcus. The screen was already lit, already unlocked. In his own message thread, a draft sat waiting, unsent. 7 words. Tell them I was with you. He deleted it. His hands were steady. He deadbolted the door. His hands were steady then too. He did not sleep. Somewhere in the fog and the narrow streets and the orange-stained dark, something wearing his face was deciding what he would remember. The taillights blinked out where the county road bent past the tree line, and I stayed crouched behind the woodpile with my knees in the dead grass and my bare feet going numb against the frozen ground, because I did not know what else to do. That was my car. I knew every scratch on the bumper, knew the way the left rear light sits slightly lower than the right from the time I backed into a parking bollard in Shreveport 3 years ago. I knew the hand on the headrest. I've backed out of 100 driveways with my right hand exactly there, fingers loose, palm down, turning to look through the rear glass with my chin at that particular angle. I know what I look like from the outside, the way you piece it together from mirrors and photographs in the occasional storefront window, and what I watched pull away down my dead father's gravel driveway was that assembled image made solid and real and moving without me inside it. I had been awake for maybe 4 minutes. Something had pulled me up through sleep, not a sound exactly, more the negative space where a sound had just been, an absence shaped like a door closing very softly. I had come outside without thinking, without shoes, drawn by some instinct I could not have named. And now the road was empty and the November dark was total, and the house behind me was lit by nothing except the small amber glow of the porch bulb my father never replaced before he died. I turned and looked at the front door. It was standing open. I had not left it open. I was certain of that the way you are certain of very few things, the kind of certain that lives in the stomach. I went back inside because the alternative was standing in the cold dark watching an empty road, and I am not sure that was the braver choice. The front door swung inward at my touch. No resistance, no creak of the old brass latch catching. I stood in the entry and looked at it for a long moment. The deadbolt was thrown back. I remembered locking it. I remembered the specific sound it made, that thick clunk my father's house had always made, different from every other deadbolt I had ever turned. Heavier somehow, more final. I had locked it and gone upstairs, and I had not come back down until something pulled me out of sleep and through that same door without shoes or a coherent thought in my head. I have been here 5 days. 5 days of sorting through a dead man's paperwork and his clothes and the small archaeology of his kitchen drawers, alone, because there was no one else to do it. My father died 3 weeks ago in the recliner in his living room, a cardiac event, the kind that announces nothing and asks permission from no one. The coroner said he had probably been sitting there a full day before the neighbour thought to check. I know every room in this house the way you know the rooms you grew up frightened in. The kitchen was how I'd left it after dinner almost. The overhead light was still off, and I crossed to the table by the glow coming through the window from the porch bulb, and that was when I saw the chair. My father's chair, the one at the head of the table with the flattened cushion he had sat in for 30 years, was pulled out at an angle, not far, maybe 8 inches, and there was a depression in that cushion that had not been there when I cleared my plate. A settled weight, a recent one. I looked at the hook by the entry. My keys were hanging exactly where I put them every night. I went to the landline on the kitchen wall because it was the only thing that made sense to do, and I dialed my own number from memory and listened to it ring from the counter 6 feet away. My phone. Sitting right where I had plugged it in before dinner, screen lit, my own name displayed across it in the dark. I let it ring until it stopped. Whoever had been in this house did not need my keys, did not want my phone. I stood with the receiver still in my hand and tried to build a shape out of that fact and could not. I went upstairs. The hallway was the particular dark of a house, with no neighbours close enough to matter, and I moved through it with one hand trailing the wall until I stopped outside my father's door. It was not fully closed. I had closed it every morning since I arrived, had made a small private ritual of it, the click of the latch a kind of boundary I was not ready to cross. It stood open now by 4 or 5 inches. The dark inside was different from the hallway dark, deeper, more deliberate. I pushed it open. The bed was untouched. The curtain above it moved. I crossed the room in 3 steps and stood looking at the window, at the 4 inches of black night between the sash and the sill, at the cold air coming through it in a slow and even current. I had tested that latch my first night there. I remembered the resistance of it, the way it needed lifting before it would seat properly. Outside was the drop to the side yard, the woodpile, the place I had crouched in the dark 10 minutes ago and convinced myself I was alone. I stood there trying to decide which direction it had moved through that window, in or out, and I could not. I put the window down and went back to the kitchen and picked up the receiver again. Curtis's number was one of 4 I still knew by heart. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep, and edged with the particular irritation of a man who had learned that late calls meant bad news. I asked him, as evenly as I could manage, if he had seen a car go by in the last half hour. He paused. The pause was long enough that I counted it. He said yes. He said he had been up for water, and the headlights came through his curtains and woke him the rest of the way. He said the car had slowed in front of his house, not stopped. Slowed. He said the driver had looked over at his place from inside the car, just turned and looked. The way you look at something you already know is there. Then he described the jacket. Green canvas, he said. That old field coat kind of thing. I looked down at my arm. The green canvas of my own sleeve. The same jacket I had put on before I went out to the woodpile. The one I was still wearing. I asked which direction the car had gone. Curtis said toward the mountain. I thanked him and told him I was fine and set the receiver back in its cradle with great care, as though noise might matter now. There is no through road toward the mountain. The pavement runs 4 miles and dies at an old logging cut, grown over and gated, and beyond it there is only elevation and dark timber. I stood in my father's kitchen and thought about the slowing, about the looking. Whatever it was, it had wanted Curtis to see its face. I sat down at the kitchen table and did not move for 2 hours. Every light in the house was on. The overhead, the stove hood, the small lamp above the sink that my father had used to read the paper at breakfast. I wanted all of it. I wanted the dark pushed back to the tree line and held there. The clock on the stove read 4:11 when I heard the gravel shift. It was a single sound, one settling like a foot placed carefully and then thought better of. I was up before I understood I had moved, and I crossed to the window and looked out, and the kitchen light was blazing behind me the whole time, and I understood immediately what that meant. I was standing in a lit frame, a picture of myself, visible from every angle the yard had to offer. My car was back. It sat in the driveway in the same, slightly crooked angle I always leave it, the front passenger tyre just kissing the grass at the edge of the gravel, the way it looks every morning when I come out with my coffee. Exactly that. The engine was off, the headlights were off, the windows were dark. I watched it for 11 minutes. I know because I checked the stove clock twice and counted the distance between the numbers. Nothing moved inside the car. No dome light came on, no door opened. It simply sat there the way a parked car sits when it has been parked for a long time and has gone cold and settled into the ground beneath it. And then it occurred to me, I had not heard it arrive. No engine on the road, no headlights crossing the curtains, no crunch of tyres slowing onto the gravel, The car was simply there, already still, already quiet, as if it had never moved at all. The light was still grey and unconvincing when I came out of the house, with my bag and my keys and my decision already made. The attorney could handle the rest. The house could sit. I was done with it. I crossed the gravel and opened the driver's door and stopped. The seat was wrong. I register these things the way you register a crooked picture on a wall you have walked past 1,000 times. It was back 2 inches from where I keep it. I'm 5'10", and I drive close to the wheel. Always have. A habit I cannot explain and have never tried to. The seat was back. Someone taller had sat there. I stood in the open door for a moment, and then I reached in and slid it forward to where it belongs. And as soon as I felt the click of it settling, I understood that I had just destroyed something. That I had touched what I should not have touched. That it was too late to undo it. I looked at the passenger seat. My father's wool cap was sitting there. The one I had found in the hall closet on my first morning, dark green with a fold at the brim, worn thin at the crown from years of use. I had left it on the entry table inside the house. I had left it there because it felt like something worth keeping. The car had been locked. I had locked it myself the night before out of a habit that now seemed almost funny. I picked it up. It was warm. Not the ambient warmth of a car left in summer sun. It was the concentrated warmth of something held, pressed close, carried against a body for a long time. The warmth of a closed fist. I dropped it on the seat and started the car and did not look back at the house as I drove away, because I was afraid of what might be standing in the window watching me go. I called Curtis somewhere past the 2nd-mile marker, when the house had disappeared behind the tree line, and I could almost convince myself I was only driving. I told him I was heading out, that the attorney had everything he needed, and asked if he would mind checking on the property over the next few days. He said of course. He said it without hesitation, the way a neighbour does when he means it. Then he said he was glad I was feeling better. I asked him what he meant by that. He said he'd come by around 11 the night before, said he'd seen the lights on and wanted to check in, the way he'd been doing since my father passed, said he knocked, and I answered. I kept my eyes on the road. Curtis said I had seemed off, distant, said I would not quite look at him directly, kept my gaze somewhere around his shoulder, and told him I was tired and going to bed early, said I had seemed almost irritated by the knock. He had not thought much of it. Grief does strange things to a man. I asked him to describe what he saw in the doorway. He described my face, my jacket, the grey one with the zipper pocket on the left sleeve, my height, my build, my voice. He said there was no question it was me. I thanked him and ended the call and drove with both hands on the wheel. I did not go back. I understood now what the sound in the yard had been. Not something arriving, something returning, stepping back out of the skin it had borrowed for a portion of the night, folding itself back into the dark, leaving the seat wrong and the hat warm and me with no way of knowing what it had done with my hands, my voice, my face, while I slept and knew nothing. It was Dennis. I was almost certain it was Dennis. I stood at the bedroom window with a cold glass of water pressed against my palm and watched him cross the gravel drive below, his footsteps grinding softly in the dark the way they always did. That particular unhurried rhythm I had absorbed over 9 years of thin walls and close quarters. The motion sensor light above his porch clicked on and caught him full in its white glare, and I could see the hang of his jacket, the particular slope of his shoulders, the way he carried his weight slightly forward like a man always just about to say something. He had been in Portland for 11 days. I knew this because I had helped him load the car, because I had watched him back out of the drive on a Tuesday morning while my coffee was still hot, because his recycling bin had been sitting unmoved at the curb since last Thursday, and I had been meaning to pull it back for him. He reached the porch steps. I lifted my glass, and then my hand stopped. He walked straight to the door, straight to it, without a single deviation, without the small leftward tilt of the head. I'd watched him perform so many times it had become invisible to me, the way breathing becomes invisible until suddenly it is not. The old lobster trap sat where it always sat, salt bleached and lopsided, and he did not look at it. He fit the key. He went inside. The hallway light came on, then went off, and the street was quiet again. The morning was cold and bright, the kind that makes everything look recently cleaned. I had my coat half on when I came around the side of the house, and saw him already there, sitting on the porch steps with a mug cupped in both hands, and something in my chest did a slow, careful thing I chose not to examine. He smiled when he saw me, said the job had wrapped early, said it was good to be home, said he had missed the salt air. He asked about the Hendersons down the road. I told him what I knew, normal words passing between normal men in ordinary morning light. Then I said it must have been late when he got in. He looked at me with an expression of mild confusion, said he had pulled into the drive around 3 in the afternoon, said he had been in bed before 9. I nodded. I said something about the time getting away from me. He laughed and lifted his mug. I went back inside and stood in the kitchen without taking my coat off. I did not imagine it. I had stood at that window long enough for my feet to go cold against the floorboards, long enough to finish half a glass of water. I had watched him cross that gravel, and I had watched him walk to that door, and the light had been on him the entire time. I set my coffee down on the counter. When I looked up through the window, Dennis was still on the porch, mug lowered, eyes fixed on the water. His face was very still. He did not blink. A long time passed, and he did not blink at all. Over the following 2 days I watched him, the way you watch a word you have written too many times until it no longer looks like itself. He took his morning walk on Tuesday but turned north along the seawall instead of south, toward the breakwater, and I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold and told myself that a man was allowed to change his route. But Dennis had walked south every morning for 11 years. He had worn a groove in his own life that deep, and people do not simply step out of grooves like that. They have to be lifted. On Wednesday he put his recycling out. He stood at the curb in his canvas jacket and looked at the bin for a long moment, something measuring in his posture, and then he carried it back inside without expression. Recycling day is Friday. He has never once gotten it wrong. I might have kept talking myself down from it. I am good at that. I have had practice. But Thursday evening Claire set down her wine and said she had seen Dennis at the fish market that afternoon, and that he had looked straight through her for 3 or 4 seconds before his face had rearranged itself into recognition. She said he had asked about her mother. She said it warmly, as though it was sweet, as though a man who had never once in a decade asked about her mother suddenly doing so was a kindness rather than a seam showing. I put my fork down on the plate and left it there. I found Ruth's number in the old neighbourhood directory we kept in the kitchen drawer, the one Claire updates every few years in her careful handwriting. I called it from the back porch with my voice already arranged into something casual, something neighbourly, something about a package and whether Dennis had mentioned anything before he got home. Ruth picked up on the 3rd ring. She did not know what I was talking about. No package. But I was barely listening by then because she had moved on, filling the silence the way people do, and what she said was that Dennis had not come home early at all. That the project had hit a wall somewhere in the 2nd week. That she had spoken to him by phone 2 days ago and he had been tired, genuinely tired. The particular flatness in a voice that only comes from weeks away from home. He was still in Portland. He was expecting to be there another week at least. I stood on the porch after the call ended and held the phone against my sternum and listened to the water moving somewhere below the seawall. The sound of it was very ordinary and that made everything worse. Then I looked down into the yard. He was standing near the gate with a piece of driftwood in both hands, pale and salt-smoothed, turning it slowly the way you turn something when you're not really looking at it. Then he raised his eyes. They found mine through the glass with a precision that suggested he had always known exactly where I was standing. He held my gaze for a moment with nothing in his face at all. Then he smiled. Just a half-second too late. I went inside and found a legal pad in the desk drawer and I sat down at the kitchen table and I wrote it all out in the order it had happened. The direction he walked each morning. The recycling sorted wrong. Claire's cheerful recounting of his visit to the fish market. The way he had smiled at her and called the halibut beautiful. Ruth's voice on the phone, tired and certain. Her husband still in Portland, still expected there a week from now. I wrote it all down in a column like a ledger, like something that could be reasoned with if it were only organised correctly. Then I added the trap. I had noticed it that first day and filed it away without meaning to, the way you file things that do not quite fit. The lobster trap that Dennis keeps beside his porch steps had always sat on the left side, anchoring the corner near the hydrangea. It was on the right now, centred differently, tilted a few degrees, as though someone had lifted it, considered it, and returned it with care but without memory. And then the car. I'd helped him load that car 11 days ago. I'd leaned into the trunk and shifted boxes, and I remembered the trip odometer still blinking from his last drive. That car should be filmed with road dust, with the particular grey salt crust that builds on wheel wells after hundreds of highway miles. I walked past it this morning and crouched beside the rear panel and ran one finger along the paint. It came away clean. I picked up my phone and dialed Dennis's mobile number from memory. It rang twice. The voice that answered was Dennis. Not an approximation of him, not something close enough to pass. It was him. The particular way he clipped the end of hello, the slight roughness he always carried in the lower register of his throat. I stood at the kitchen window with the legal pad still on the table behind me, and I watched the man across the street lift a glass of water and drink from it slowly. We talked for several minutes about nothing, the weather turning. Whether the harbour master was going to resurface the dock this season, or let it go another year. The voice was easy and warm and certain of itself, and I almost let it go. I almost said goodbye and set the phone down and told myself I had been building something out of nothing. Instead, I heard myself say that I had been thinking lately about that night 4 years ago, the two of us out on the breakwater with a bottle of whiskey after his father passed. Whether he remembered it. The pause lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt much longer than that. Then the voice said, yes, of course. Said it had been a hard night. I stood very still. Through the window, the man across the street set his glass down and folded his hands on the table in front of him. I told the voice I'd only asked because it had been on my mind. Then I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the legal pad and did not move for a long time. The headlights swept across the ceiling before I heard the engine, and I was already at the window. Dennis climbed out slowly, the way a man climbs out of a car after a long drive when his back has begun to remind him of his age. He was wearing the canvas jacket, the one with the frayed left cuff he had never bothered to repair. He reached back inside for his bag, and then he turned toward the house and he stopped. He was looking at the lobster trap. I watched his head lower slightly, the way it does when he's doing arithmetic in his mind, adding things up that do not yet equal anything he recognizes. He set his bag down on the asphalt without seeming to notice he'd done it. The driveway lamp caught the side of his face, and I could read it the way you read weather coming in off the water. Something had arrived behind his eyes that was not quite fear and not quite understanding, but lived in the narrow corridor between the two. Then he looked up at the house. He looked at the hallway light burning behind the glass, and he did not move toward the door. He just stood there with the bag at his feet and his hands open at his sides, and I realized in the same moment that the hallway behind me was not empty, that there were sounds coming from deeper in the house, soft and unhurried sounds, the sounds of someone who had been waiting a long time and had grown comfortable doing it. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called him without thinking, watching through the glass as the shape of him in the driveway went still at the vibration in his jacket. He answered on the first ring. I told him not to go inside. There was a pause, not the pause of a man surprised, but the pause of a man who's been half expecting to hear exactly those words. He said he knew. He said it quietly, the way you say a thing you have been turning over for 2 days without being able to name it. He told me about the feeling. A pull, he said. Like something had tied a thread behind his sternum and had been drawing it taut slowly since Wednesday. He had meant to wait until morning. He had driven 4 hours in the dark instead. He said he thought it was just the place calling him home the way it sometimes did. He said his key was already in his hand. Below me I watched him look up at the hallway window, the yellow light framed in the glass, and then down at the key catching the driveway lamp, and then the hallway light went out. The house went completely dark. Dennis did not move. I did not move. The phone was warm against my ear and I could hear him breathing and nothing else. No sound at all from either side of that door, because whatever had spent 11 days learning the shape of a man's life had never thought to wonder whether that man might not come home alone.